The cremation, the rituals, the endless sobbing relatives. He had been through it all. He had stood by her body, watched the flames consume her. He had collected her ashes, and yet here it was, her name, her number, flashing on his screen. For a long, dreadful moment, he just stared. His mind screamed at him not to pick up, to throw the phone away, to run. But his heart ached. His mother had always been his anchor, his guiding light in a world that often felt too dark. With a deep, shuddering breath, he swiped to answer. Hello? Silence. Then a faint crackling, like a weak radio signal, and then, Amit, beta. His stomach turned to ice. That voice, soft, loving, unmistakable. Ma. He shot upright in bed, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. Ma, he whispered. Ma. Kakaisi. Her voice crackled, distant, as if traveling across an abyss. Beta, mujhe dhund lo. Main yahan akeli hoon. A sudden static burst made him wince, and then, nothing. The call ended. Amit sat frozen, his mind racing. He checked his call logs. No record of the call. His hands were shaking now. He switched to his contacts, clicked on his mother's number, and dialed back. The number you are trying to reach is switched off. The robotic voice sent chills down his spine. His mouth was dry. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Grief playing tricks on him? Or was it real? He barely slept that night. The next morning, dark circles etched under his eyes. He tried to dismiss it as a glitch, a coincidence. But the thought gnawed at him all day. What if Ma was trying to tell him something? That night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, he answered immediately. Ma, his voice cracked. Amit, her voice was weaker. Beta, yahan andhera hai. Bahut thand hai. Tears burned his eyes. Kahan ho ma? Aap, wo mujhe le ja rahe hain. Amit, mujhe dhund lo. Amit's blood ran cold. Kaun ma? Kaun le ja raha hai aapko? A terrible, distorted sound screeched through the speaker. He yanked the phone away from his ear, his pulse hammering, and then, for a brief second, he heard something else. A whisper, a low, guttural voice in the background, not his mother's. It was speaking his name. Amit bolted Fugolegason. Ma! Ma! Bollier! But all that remained was silence. The call ended. Again, no record of it in his phone. Panic clawed at his chest. What the hell was happening? He had to do something. He had to find out if this was real or just his grief playing cruel tricks. He decided to visit the cremation ground the next morning. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wood and incense when he arrived. The ground was still littered with ash from recent rituals. He walked to the exact spot where his mother's body had turned to smoke and dust, his heart thudding. Something inside him whispered, "Look beneath." His hands trembled as he knelt. He pushed aside the loose ashes. His fingers scraped against something hard. A phone. His breath hitched. It was his mother's. The one she had with her in the hospital. The one that should have been burned with her. He picked it up, his fingers tingling with unease. The screen was cracked, but when he pressed the power button, it turned on. The wallpaper was still the same, a picture of him and his mother from years ago. But the battery indicator, 33%, 3:33 a.m. His stomach twisted. He checked the call logs with trembling hands. One outgoing call. To his number. Amit staggered backward, on the seventh slipping from his grasp. As she lay in bed, this wasn't a hallucination. Shifted. His mother had called murmur, but from like where? Voices speaking a gust of wind howled through the cremation curled ground, around the edges the ashes into the air. She sat in that swirling, shifting dust. The house groaned with age, not his own. The wind rattled the windows. Something stood there, but underneath just beyond the veil there was something else. Smoke. A whisper. Watching him. It was not the words to see what it was. It was the tone. That night, he didn't sleep. a plea. He sat in his room.
She told herself it was just the house
settling,
too
but
terrified
the sound
to
didn't
turn it
stop.
off.
It grew
afraid
stronger,
to keep it on,
more insistent. Then
And
at 3:33
just as she felt
a.m.,
the
it
whispering
rang.
press against
This
her
time he
ears,
hesitated.
a sharp knock
Every
echoed
instinct
from somewhere
screamed at
deep
him
in
to
the
ignore
house.
it, but
Olivia
then
froze.
a whisper
She
from
held
the
her
phone
breath,
speaker.
listening.
The
Amit
knock came again.
Beta,
This time
Madad
slower.
Caro,
His
deliberate.
mother's voice. Her pulse
Weak,
pounded as she
desperate.
slid out of bed.
With a deep
the floor
breath, he
cold
answered.
beneath her feet.
Ma,
She didn't own a pet.
static. She
Then a
lived
low,
alone.
rasping breath.
There was no
and
logical
something
reason
else.
for a sound
a third
like
that
voice,
to come from
not
inside.
his mother's, not
She
human.
stepped into the hallway.
A deep, guttural
every shadow
chuckle.
stretching too long.
She's with
in
us
the
now.
dim glow of the moon.
The line went
filtering
dead.
through the
Amit
stained
felt his
glass
soul
window at
shatter.
the end of the corridor.
This was no longer about
the house
grief.
loomed around
No
her.
longer about
its silence
closure.
thick and
Something had
expectant.
taken her. Something was
Another
keeping
knock.
her from peace.
This
and
time
he had
she
to get her
pinpointed
back.
the source. The attic. A shiver ran down her spine. The attic door was just at the end of the hall, a heavy wooden thing she hadn't even dared to open since moving in. Something inside her screamed to turn back, to pretend she had never heard anything. But another part, the part that needed to know, pushed her forward. She reached the attic door and hesitated. The air around it felt wrong, thick like walking through unseen cobwebs. The handle was cold as ice beneath her fingers. She turned it slowly, the door creaking as it swung inward. Darkness yawned before her. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. She stepped inside, the floorboards sighing under her weight. The air was stale, heavy with dust, but there was something else, a scent, faint but distinct. Lavender, her mother's perfume. A sudden flicker of movement caught her eye. She turned, her heart slamming against her ribs. The antique mirror in the corner. Something moved within it. Not her reflection, something else. She took a step closer, barely breathing. The glass rippled as though it were water, and then a hand, pale, trembling, pressing against the inside of the mirror. Her mother's hand. A strangled gasp escaped her lips as the fingers scratched weakly at the glass, leaving streaks in the dust. Olivia stumbled back, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move. Then the whispering returned. But this time it was clear. "Help me." Tears burned in Olivia's eyes. "Mom?" Her voice was a broken whisper. The figure in the mirror, her mother, opened her mouth, but no sound came. Only the whispering, growing louder, overlapping voices, twisting together into something frantic, pleading. "She took me, she took me, she took me." Olivia's stomach turned. Who? Who took you?" The whispering stopped. And then, behind her, another knock, slow, measured, just outside the attic door. She turned, breath shuddering. The air felt heavier, colder. The door, which she had left open, was now closed. A shadow spilled beneath it. Not a normal shadow. It moved. Dragged. Olivia backed toward the mirror, her mother's face still twisted in silent desperation. She reached out without thinking, her fingertips brushing the glass. It was ice cold, and for a split second, it gave beneath her touch. Like it wasn't glass at all, but a thin membrane separating her from something else. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. The handle rattled, and then a voice, low and wrong, slid through the keyhole. "You shouldn't be here." Olivia turned back to the mirror, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Mom, what do I do?" Her mother's eyes widened, and her mouth moved in a silent scream. The door behind her burst open. Darkness poured in, thick and suffocating. Cold hands clamped around Olivia's wrists, yanking her away from the mirror. She screamed, thrashing, but the grip was inhumanly strong, pulling her into the abyss of the attic's shadows. The last thing she saw was her mother, slamming her palm against the inside of the mirror, her face twisted in agony. And then Olivia was gone. The house fell silent. The attic door hung open, the darkness inside undisturbed. The mirror stood in the corner, its surface smooth once more. And from within, barely audible, a whisper. "Help me."